Welcome to Divorce Coalition Live, a show designed for divorce professionals to show how the divorce process affects domestic abuse survivors. I'm your host, Beverly Price, CEO and Executive Director of the Divorce Coalition and Certified Divorce Coach at Her Empowered Divorce. The Divorce Coalition is a nonprofit dedicated to increasing education and awareness of divorce professionals and create process change for a more supportive and less traumatic divorce experience for survivors. We have united top podcast hosts and divorce professionals to create systematic change in the divorce process for abuse survivors. With expert guests, practical advice, and enlightening conversations, you'll find that knowledge is power in creating change in the world of domestic abuse. So without further ado, let's get started. In today's world of divorce, more and more couples are using mediation as a different path to divorce. When domestic abuse is involved, the situation becomes cloudier. Today, I'm asking my guest, the talented and knowledgeable Tracy Moore-Grant, if, as a professional, you can successfully mediate a divorce with domestic abuse of any kind. Tracy has practiced exclusively in the area of family law since 2002 and is a founding partner of the firm Patterson Moore Butler. She's also the founder of the Amicable Divorce Network, an international association of vetted professionals who are dedicated to helping people navigate the process of divorce in an efficient and low conflict manner. Hi, Tracy. Thank you so much for being my guest today. It is so wonderful to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me, Beverly. I really appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. You are. It's such a thrill to have such an expert guest on about this topic.
It's a very important topic. Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Before we dive into our topic, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you do?
Sure. I am a family law attorney, and I have only practiced family law since becoming an attorney. Like you said, I'm dating myself, but since 2002. My law office is in Georgia, and I help clients all over the state of Georgia as an attorney. I'm a non-litigation attorney. So when I'm representing a client, I only work outside the court system, helping people resolve things uncontested. Amicable, mediation, or arbitration are some of the different roles that I hold. And I am very passionate about mediation and using this alternate dispute resolution tool to solve all kinds of problems that people may have when they're navigating a divorce.
Wonderful. That is so important. So as we dive in, my experience with this topic, mediation and domestic abuse, is I won't say it's controversial per se, but there's almost like two ends of the spectrum, two camps, if you will. Mm-hmm. One that says absolutely not, it can never be litigated. And I think in many cases, the other element that ties into this is what type of abuse are you talking about? A lot of people think abuse is just physical, mm-hmm. but there are many, many other types. Yes. So we have to factor that into the equation as well. But so one camp says never, mm-hmm. and one camp says absolutely. And I kind of feel like that you move in a little bit toward the middle, depending on the situation. But Can you help me understand, and can you share your thoughts about, can a couple mediate when there's a history of domestic violence? Let's say violence, physical violence first, and then let's take it to the other forms of abuse.
Certainly. So I am a mediator, and I am trained to mediate cases that involve domestic violence. And so in the court system where I operate in Georgia, to be a mediator, you have to take the civil training and then the domestic training, and then you have the option to take the domestic violence training. So I have all of that. So I often get appointed in cases where there is domestic violence, because I would say generally our court system has a feeling of you can work out any sort of difficult issue. And so one thing I always tell people to think of is that a divorce case or any sort of family law matter will reach a resolution. It will come to an end. And that end will either be one that is controlled by the parties and something that they come up with through the process of mediation or otherwise, or the judge will tell you what your result is. And so,
Exactly.
so whether there is domestic violence or not, the case will come to a conclusion. And if you want to be a participant in what that conclusion is, no matter how difficult your issues, you should be in the process of mediation or otherwise. And so there's definitely some safeguards we can put in place for physical abuse to make sure that everybody is safe in that situation.
That brings up a good point in that regard. What about if the domestic violence is so active that there's a protection order in place? How does that impact mediation?
So it's on Zoom, really easy. The technology advancements that we have had have made this very possible. So first of all, I think it's important to point out when I'm a mediator in a case, I never put people in the same room. And so even if it's on Zoom, we have Zoom breakout rooms.
Oh, okay.
So they are completely separate. They can't see one another. Neither can their counsel. They can't go into the different Zoom rooms. I always make sure when they enter the lobby, they're not even in the lobby at the same time. And so then I move them into a private room. And so because of the advancements we have with Zoom, they can be in any location where they feel safe, not even in the same building, and utilize that technology in order to have a mediation.
Wow, fabulous. To jump back, when you were talking about your training to be a mediator with domestic violence, where does a professional go to get that kind of training?
So I am trained in Georgia, and so there are several agencies here that do training. And the one that I use was called Resolve to Solve. Another big one is Henning, and they do state-specific training for domestic violence for what our state requirements are for that. And it's a couple of days of full days of training plus practicum. Plus watching and shadowing other mediators and keeping on top of your training to continue to be on the court-appointed list. And so the domestic violence training isn't something that everyone takes, but I did do that. And so I do get appointed in a lot of cases that do involve an active protective order or physical violence, or we have a form where people can report other forms of violence like you touched on.
Yeah, I do the same thing with my clients. That's like the first question when I talk with them is that going on in their lives?
Yeah.
So that's great information. Do you think that in order to be a good mediator, that you need to also be an attorney?
No, I mean, there are several excellent mediators I know in our state who aren't attorneys, but they have a very good passion and good skill set with helping people resolve things. So in our state, you don't need to be an attorney to be a mediator. And so we do see some of that. I will say the bulk of attorneys are mediators. I would say easily, 90% of the mediators that I use and that I know are attorneys, but we also do have some really great ones who aren't. And I think that's just sort of how it is in Georgia. And it definitely varies by state. I found mediation to be one of the things that varies widely from state to state and definitely from county to county and country to country. So
I've noticed here in South Carolina that the definition of mediation that some attorneys use looks to me like they're just proceeding through the legal process to settlement rather than an actual person-to-person negotiation. It's actually maybe the attorneys doing the negotiation. Do you think there's a lot of misunderstanding about what mediation is?
I think there is. And I think one of the issues with that is that there is no sort of, let's just say, national standard.
Right.
So there isn't any sort of national guidelines to say, this is a mediation, this is how you conduct a mediation. And so it is left up to each state to determine in their rules. And even in Georgia, it varies judicial district by judicial district. It's really
Gotcha.
interesting. So some things that are very different per jurisdiction are whether the attorneys are present at the mediation. In some states, that isn't normal. In Georgia, you would not go to a mediation without your attorney if you have one. That would be, not allowed. And also the issue and whether you put people in the same room or not, regardless of the domestic violence. So if we have a case without those types of allegations, in Georgia, we generally proceed and caucus the entire time. But in other states, people are in the same room the entire time. So these types of things vary, as well as how many sessions is normal, how long a mediation lasts. There is no sort of standard procedure for a mediation.
Wow. So how do you handle the concern that I've heard many victims/survivors, and just for everybody out there, from what I've gathered in my research, many people subject to domestic abuse may prefer to call themselves survivors rather than victims, particularly once they've initiated the divorce process. But many of them are afraid of mediation because they perceive that their abuser is very manipulative, like a chameleon, can look really nice and together, but behind closed doors, they're an animal. And they're afraid that the abuser will manipulate the mediator. What are your thoughts that you'd like to share with anybody maybe about that, and how to prevent that if you're a professional?
So if you are using an experienced mediator and you generally on the court appointed list have a lot of experience, or your counsel is picking a mediator, or you're looking at people and you're using a mediator with, let's say, 10 years of experience, this is not their first rodeo.
Okay.
Since the beginning of my career, I have dealt with thousands of clients. I have dealt with thousands of people in mediation. And while you definitely want to build rapport with everybody, I mean, you certainly can see under the hood without being told. When people are trying to play you, how to identify those types of abusive behaviors and manipulation. I mean, we all sort of have little like ding, 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 like, the little light is going off. Now, the ultimate goal is to help these parties reach a resolution. So, you want to be nice to both sides, and you want to help them be able to resolve this outside of the court system and take the control of that and be done with this situation.
Right.
If people are in a litigation, they're looking at an average of an 18-month process. So if through the process of mediation, we can cut down the cost and the time and the conflict and get the survivor to move on with their life, that's a win for everybody.
Right. How much training in domestic violence does an attorney get that's not a mediator versus an attorney that's a mediator or a mediator? How do you contrast the amounts and even the quality?
The attorney gets no training. So even if
okay.
you are a family law specialist, for example, there is no mandatory training for you in Georgia that I'm aware of to be well-versed in helping victims of domestic violence, identifying that, putting in safety protocols. There's nothing out there. Now, attorneys may voluntarily choose to take those types of courses through continuing education. They may say, I'm very interested in this, but there is no requirement. There is a requirement if you are a mediator and you choose to specialize in domestic violence like I have. It's, multiple days of courses. They watch you mediate from the court. You shadow people to mediate, and, it's definitely on a higher level there. But just being a family law attorney, you learn on the job. There's no specific training for that, which is a shame.
Yeah. How about with judges, if it does go to litigation? What's the scenario there?
I think it's very similar. Judges do get training. They go to a judicial conference every year, and there are certain topics that are presented to them. So if they happen to have been at a conference that has a class for domestic violence, they would get that training. But it's interesting that people need to remember judges generally hear a wide variety of cases. So
Yes.
in Georgia, in the county that I am in, we have 3 superior court judges, and they are going to hear domestic violence cases, but they're also going to hear land dispute cases. Somebody planted a
Right.
tree in my yard. They're going to hear criminal felony cases. So they have a wide range of things that they're having to be trained on. Whereas if you go one county down where Atlanta is in Fulton County, they do have judges who are specific to family law. And so I would assume in that system that they have advanced training and knowledge in those topics. But generally speaking, judges have a wide range of topics and cases that they're hearing. I would not expect them to be well versed in domestic violence unless they've taken the initiative to get that training.
Gotcha. I spoke to one judge and almost cried after I heard him, but his statement was that he didn't take domestic violence cases too seriously because he believed there was so much false reporting. What are your thoughts on that?
Unfortunately, I think that is what happens in the court system. When you decide to have your case heard by a judge and not try to reach a resolution yourself, you are stuck with that judge's judgment.
Right.
You are stuck with their personal experience and knowledge, their thoughts and feelings. And so you are sort of stuck with that attitude. I mean, if you're sending it off to the court to say, Judge, I'm standing here and I want you to decide my issues, you're also subject to cross-examination by the other side. And, that can be very brutal. This incident happened. Why didn't you call the police immediately? Why did you handle it this way? Why did you stay in the marriage? And they get blamed for all of these things that are very common for domestic violence. Women traditionally are the victims and traditionally don't leave the first time. They often initiate divorce 7 times before actually following through with it over the course of several years.
Right.
And it's very rare to find a judge that understands that, is receptive to that, and doesn't, say, well, you obviously didn't take this very seriously because you didn't make a police report, or, you didn't mention this to your friends and family, things like that. It's more common for judges to not understand all of the dynamics of domestic violence.
Yeah. One of the reasons, or kind of the mission of the Divorce Coalition, is to end the trauma that the divorce process can impose on a survivor. That there are studies that actually show that not only did a victim feel traumatized through their marriage, but that the legal system, the legal process, the divorce professionals actually cause a re-traumatization. How do you think we as professionals can change that?
I think it takes people who are doing family law to really take the time and effort to take those trainings and to educate themselves. If you want to be a family law specialist, this is the training that you need to take to be able to truly help your clients and understand their psychology and their situation. And it really would be nice if the state bar level in every state would require, you're in the family law section of the bar, we have a mandatory domestic violence CLE credit every year. For you to meet your CLE credit, you have to take, X number of hours of domestic violence. We have a family law institute every year. Many, many divorce attorneys go to it and enjoy that. I can't remember a domestic violence training being offered even during that, where you have a wide audience.
Wow.
And I think you're really doing a disservice to a huge population of clients. And, to a certain extent, I think you have professionals who don't care. They do family law to pay the bills and to get money and to meet their billable hour request.
Right.
And then you have sort of the other segment, which are the professionals we welcome at the Amicable Divorce Network, who got into family law to help people. And if, any professional is listening to this and they haven't sought out, any sort of domestic violence training, I would put that on the list. Make sure that you get that. And I think it will really open their eyes and offer a whole new set of experiences and services to their clients.
Would you suggest the training to them is the same training you mentioned earlier through Henning, or is there another better or different domestic violence training for other legal professionals beyond mediators?
I know of no better or different training other than the one for mediators, which you wouldn't be able to take if you're just an attorney. This is for mediators who have already taken civil and domestic. It's sort of a tiered approach.
Gotcha.
There needs to be something. I think
Okay.
there needs to be training on this, and it needs to be widely offered, and it needs to be something that's heavily promoted. I know of nothing.
Okay.
I think there needs to be something. Absolutely.
Okay. Well, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. Domestic abuse survivors experience a lack of trust in the divorce and legal systems in place to protect them. Many report re-traumatization in court and reported that legal professionals, in an awful way, verbally threatened them, mocked them, did not give them a chance to speak in court, exaggerated the survivors' faults, and provoked them to elicit emotional reactions. The Divorce Coalition is a nonprofit organization created to change this experience for abuse victims and survivors. For more information, go to divorcecoalition.com or find us at our Instagram and Facebook pages at Divorce Coalition page. You can support us by making a tax-deductible donation at divorcecoalition.com/donate-now, which will also be in the show notes. And now back to the show. Tracy, what would you say needs to happen beyond all of the education that we talked about to modify the divorce process to not re-traumatize these victims?
Well, one thing I think that domestic violence survivors need to be really aware of is that they do have choices on how to get divorced. And so I think it's a matter of educating them, educating domestic violence shelters, and just the public in general, because we're not really sure who that first reach out might be to. A mental health professional, a friend. But it's important to educate everybody that everyone has a choice on how to get divorced. And they do not need to access the court system, which I agree with your assertion about it re-traumatizing people. And they really don't feel heard and understood and vindicated and protected. And
Right.
So, for example, the Amicable Divorce Network, we have an out-of-court process that is parallel to the court process, where it can be conducted on Zoom. It can be conducted efficiently. And our members are all encouraged to get the domestic violence training if they're going to be taking those types of cases. So we have some training on being an amicable advocate and different things of that nature that we encourage our members to raise the bar and have a higher level of professionalism and education. So they need to understand that they don't have to go through the victimizing court system. They can choose other options. And sometimes that does take the cooperation of the other spouse to a certain extent to decide on a different process. And sometimes they won't do that because they're not going to give the person anything that they want. However, we do see a high success rate with people choosing this out of court process when they have domestic violence issues, because a lot of times they're also employed. They don't want their dirty laundry aired in the court system. They don't want everybody to know all these bad things about them. And so there's a benefit to the perpetrator as well, to have this done privately and efficiently. And they don't really get that megaphone into the court system and the issue comes to a conclusion.
Yeah. Besides being more private a process, isn't it also a lot less expensive than a court process?
Yes, it's incredibly streamlined and designed to be a lot less expensive. And I think there's a misconception when we say amicable that, somebody especially experiencing domestic violence would think that's not for me because I'm not amicable with this person. But it's actually the professionals who are vetted for being amicable. They could have a conversation with another professional and say, look, your client has these extreme allegations of domestic abuse against them. We want to handle it this way. Let's get this thing done. But the entire process is on a technology platform, is designed to also be conducted via Zoom, from meetings with the attorneys to mediation and conclusion, and is designed to be efficient and to the point. And so it would not be one party sitting for depositions, and feeling like they have to re-answer those questions and somebody screaming at them. That wouldn't be the type of behavior that we would be conducting. It would be, what are the issues? How can we get these parties away from each other?
Is that technology-driven process unique to you and the Amicable Divorce Network, or is it across all mediation?
No, this is something that we've developed. And so the amicable divorce process is something that only we have and only our members get training on. And then the process is hosted on the Amicable Divorce Network technology platform, which is hosted by detour.life. And it allows the exchange of information, budgeting, and different aspects like that, so that people can really take control of the process and their information and get a result. And so, yeah, that's just for us. So if that's something that people are interested in or being a member of, definitely reach out if this resonates with you.
Absolutely. I have a client right now who was in a terribly abusive marriage. I think we label it coercive control, with all the elements of verbal, emotional, mental, and financial abuse in the umbrella. And it was suggested to them that they go through mediation, even though the spouse was a very hostile spouse. And they went in, and after one exchange of proposal, he threw his hands up and said, "I'm never going to give her what she wants," and walked out.
Yeah.
Is there anything a mediator can do to stave off that kind of thing, to try and get those who might normally walk to kind of sit at the table? Or is that kind of just sometimes what happens?
That happens even in cases where we don't have these allegations. Somebody gets hot. Unless I can't jump on them and grab their legs and make them stay. But, what we're trained,
that's a visual of that.
Please don't walk out. That's just not happening. But I think building a rapport, and you keep everybody separate. So whereas I might be building a rapport with the perpetrator, and trying to get them invested in the process and see the benefits of the process, which usually is saving money, being in control, having a creative result. The unfortunate situation is when you do have the coercive control, the mediator needs to be really trained in making sure that everything was this person's idea. Even if you have in your head their proposal, you just have to be, gosh, how do you think we should split these finances? How do you think we should do this? Everybody is saying that you're the person that really knows how to handle these finances. What do you think? And you almost, need to really play into that and handle it that way.
Gotcha.
The reality is over 95% of cases out there do not go to court, whether they have domestic violence issues or not. So even if somebody walks from a mediation, they still will get a bill from their attorney for trial, right? And so they're still a financially usually motivated person. And so a lot of times, what was that offer again? Like, let's have another conversation about that.
Exactly.
Yeah. So even if somebody bolts from the mediation, you can always have another mediation. You can always continue to send offers that are often accepted. And you can also consider, in some states, arbitration, which is a neutral person like me who has the same authority as a judge to hear the facts and issue an order on a much tighter timeline and for a lot of cost savings. So that's something else to think about.
How long does mediation typically take?
So this is another thing that varies widely from state to state. So for me, we call them marathon mediations in Georgia. And there's a couple of things to know about that. One is we are blind mediators. So the only thing I know when I start a mediation is who are the parties, who are their attorneys, where do I need to be, and what level of domestic violence has already been reported. And often domestic violence hasn't been reported. People haven't
Exactly.
filled out the proper forms. And so when I walk in, it's like, oh, by the way, and I'm like, okay. So, I can adjust in real time. But in an amicable case, we always try to have two mediations, one that focuses on minor children first, and then the second one focuses on the finances, so people don't mingle those issues together. But,
I like doing the children first. So many
yeah.
don't do it that way.
Yeah, I think that's very important and usually leads to a lot of success and shorter mediations because we focused on that. We got it done, sense of relief. In Georgia, I've been in mediations till 1 o'clock in the morning. People work until it's done, or somebody calls it quits. I don't think that's a great way to do things, and it certainly isn't the norm. I've heard in other states where people without their attorneys visit a mediator for 1 hour at a time and handle it that way. There's just many different ways to go about it, and there isn't any sort of standard.
Yeah. Many times I think an abuse survivor has gone through an experience that really kind of deflates them. No self-esteem, no
Yeah.
self-worth, afraid to speak up, those kinds of things. How do you, as a mediator, checkpoint that victim isn't just giving in because either she's afraid of the abuser or she can't make a decision because she's been so emotionally and mentally weakened? Share a little bit about that.
So in the mediations that I do, and I've always done, they would be sitting there with their attorney.
Okay.
And so that is a sort of safety valve right there, where their attorney is going to be saying things like, the court would never do that. Like, you don't need to agree to that. Like, that is not legally appropriate, and would be rendering that legal advice in real time.
Right.
So as a mediator, I can't render legal advice. I'm only an advocate for the agreement. And so I think in a situation, if people are representing themselves and are pro bono, it's a matter of, saying, would you like to have this reviewed by an attorney and put a pin in it and get your questions answered before signing this? How do you feel about this? Is this something that you have wanted to agree to all along, or do you have a different idea? Tell me what your idea is, and let's, work on that a little bit. Do you feel like you can negotiate today? Do you have all the information? And sometimes as a mediator, I also have the right to terminate the mediation.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I can say, and I don't even have to blame one party or the other. So they're separate. And so if I think this person really just doesn't have the ability to negotiate on this day, I can go to the other one and say, I am so sorry. I got a call from my kid's school. They're sick and I have to end this mediation. And I am so sorry, but we will pick this up on another day. End of story. So there's just, ways to go about it to, sort of stop the process if you do not feel like the parties have a balance of both power and information.
Yeah, that's typically my concern, is that power imbalance. And given that all abuse is about power and control, how that can play out. You mentioned something, you used a phrase that I love, that a mediator advocates for the agreement. They don't advocate for one party or the other. They advocate for agreement. I love that. That to me summarizes it all.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. You always want to point out the benefits of this agreement today, the cost and conflict of court by not reaching an agreement, and so you're really just advocating for settlement, but not either party's position.
Wow. So do the agreements that you would come up with in mediation differ, particularly in cases with domestic abuse, than those without?
Yeah, they usually do, especially if they involve minor children. So that's a big one, because a lot of times there is still going to be a parenting plan and some sort of parental contact. And that could vary greatly depending on the situation. But one of the things we almost always use is our family wizard, and utilize that as their technology platform and all of the different safety protocols that they have in place for communication and all of the different safety things. Often, depending on, the behavior that we're seeing, sometimes we have to have communication protocols, which is If you're using our Family Wizard, you're allowed to send one message per day that summarizes what your issues are for the day. And, the other party has to check our Family Wizard one time a day between, 3 and 4 p.m. because if they're able to text one another, a lot of times that violates boundaries and can also be very triggering for the other person. They're at work and hear their phones going off and they know that that's that person. They're going to have to deal with something. So really try to put a bubble around that. A lot of times they are not exchanging at homes. Sometimes it's not even the parties that are doing the exchanges. If they have, other family members, that would feel safe. Sometimes they're exchanging at places that have a balance of safety and not being traumatized for the children, perhaps a grocery store or gas station. Sometimes in very extreme situations, it's a police department or a fire station. So depending on the situation that has gone on, we have a whole list of things that we can implement.
How do you think domestic violence I think this is getting maybe too controversial. Domestic violence of the parent affect the child?
I think it really depends because a lot of times we see where the one partner has violence against the other and is a perfectly wonderful parent and does nothing to the parent. And so I think it really depends. If we have a child that has witnessed domestic violence, obviously we have, that is a violence against the child. And that is something that needs to be, handled and taken care of. And perhaps that's a relationship that can or cannot be repaired or ongoing. And I think it's just a matter of, being mindful if it's a coercive control situation, when the child gets to be a certain age, do they then start using that behavior now against the child to get back to the parent or just because that's how they are? And it's just a real matter of having a whole support system around you, including legal professionals and mental health professionals that understand domestic violence, all of its nuances, and are prepared to help.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So if an abusive or if a victim or someone that's in active abuse, whether it's physical or coercive control, wants to divorce, who should they contact first between an attorney and a mediator?
An attorney, hands down, because the attorney will be able to assess the case and perhaps may recommend that they need to get a domestic violence protective order. That's what we call it in Georgia. It's called, similar terms in other states, to physically separate the parties and to give certain protections to the victim. And they can assess whether a mediation should be conducted and how it would be conducted. And so if you go through the legal process with an attorney, it's going to trigger a domestic violence protocol, so to speak. So if you are ordered to a mediation, it's going to be with domestic violence protections in place, which vary from having it on Zoom all the way to you have to have it at a courthouse where you go through security and you're on separate floors and, different things like that. Yes. So getting with a professional, and you can look at their bio, you can look at their training. Do they have domestic violence experience? That would be the type of professional you want to reach out to. And then they can guide through the process in a proper way.
Yeah, that's a big question. I think you hit the nail on the head. How does someone find an attorney and or a mediator skilled in domestic violence? Because I don't think in these cases you should just go to an attorney who your neighbor suggests, right? You need someone specific to handle this situation.
Yes, you want to get a specialist, just like you don't want to go to a general practitioner for your heart issue. You want to go to a cardiologist. You want to go to a specialist for domestic violence. Look at their bio. Everybody has a website and everybody has a bio, and they're going to list what they're all about. They're going to list what their training is. And if you have questions when you call, you can ask whoever their intake person is or however that's handled, what training do they have? What experience do they have in domestic violence? And even if the person is saying, I don't know, I'm new here, I don't know what you're talking about, ask that in your consult when you're meeting with somebody. How many cases have you handled? what is your plan for handling a case like mine? And how, can I expect this to go? What training have you had in domestic violence? I would say when you're searching, you probably do want to look for somebody who is both an attorney and a mediator, because there's a much higher likelihood that they are involved in the mandatory domestic violence training.
Gotcha. Okay. Sounds really good. Well, Tracy, this has been phenomenal. I've learned so much. I've been rapidly taking notes here. How can our audience find you and find the Amicable Divorce Network? And if a professional wants to learn more, where do they go?
Whether you're a professional or a member of the public, you can go to amicableddivorcenetwork.com. If you're searching for a professional in your area, if you're a client, you can look at our membership directory, find somebody in your area. If you're a professional interested in being a part of our organization, amicableddivorcenetwork.com. And then under membership resources, there's an application there. We do vet all of our members for being experienced, resolution focused, and engaging in fair billing practices. So we do require an application and vetting process.
Wow, that's important, I think.
I
Thank
agree.
you again for being my guest today. This has been great.
Thank you.
And to my audience, thank you so much for being with Tracy and me on this episode of Divorce Coalition Live. All of Tracy's information will be available in the show notes. You can watch this episode at WGSN's YouTube channel, Divorce Coalition, or you can also find it on divorcecoalition.com and look for the live show tab. Please like and subscribe so we can reach as many divorce professionals as possible. Again, you can find Divorce Coalition at divorcecoalition.com. Let's come together and champion a brighter future for domestic abuse survivors through the divorce process. Stay tuned next time for another episode of Divorce Coalition Live, improving the divorce experience for abuse survivors. Starting in March, our time and day will change to Thursdays at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. Until next time, stay safe and grow.